In this video, we're going to talk about the EIDL grant and the EIDL loan fraud. So the report just came out yesterday, and I'm going to go through it and share what you can do to make sure that you stay out of hot water. But before we do, if this is your first time at our channel or you haven't subscribed, click on the subscribe button at the bottom. My name is Travis Sickle, Certified Financial Planner, helping you reach your financial goals. So before we go through the report of serious concerns of potential fraud, I do want to go through some of the headlines and the numbers so you can put some context as we go through this report. And of course, we're going to go through on how to keep yourself safe and what you should look for to make sure that you're not committing fraud on your EIDL loan or your EIDL grant. So I'm going to pull it up on the screen. So this is the report, which we're going to go into just a second. You can see the titling of it right there, the serious concerns of potential fraud in economic injury disaster loan program pertaining to the response to COVID-19. Now, before we go through that, I just did a quick Google search of EIDL fraud, and here's what the news says on Google. It says, scathing SBA watchdog report details pervasive fraud. Small business disaster relief program, target of fraud. SBA IG warns of widespread potential fraud. Widespread potential fraud. And SBA grants programs attracting the wrong kind of attention. Now, before we get into the report, I do want to go through the SBA's most recent numbers just so we can put it in context. So here is the most recent report on the EIDL advance. So these are the numbers that we can see for the EIDL dispersed. It was 5,781,390 and total dollars, 20 billion. And you can see in this report, it breaks it down by state and how much was approved per state and the dollar amount. Then we flip over to this other report right here. We can see that the EIDL loans was 2,985,268 right there. And then total approved dollars was 163 billion, or just over 163 billion. Now, this is really important to take in these numbers as you're going through this report, because you have no basis for how big the loan program is and the advance and the EIDL advance grant is in comparison to this report. So let me go ahead and pull it up on the screen so we can put it into context. So I highlighted some of the major pieces that I wanted to go over. And this is two parts. First, it's a memo, and it's from the Inspector General, and you can see that right here. And it's to Jovita Carranza, who runs the Small Business Administration too. And then there is a response to the second half of this memo or this document that Jovita Carranza responds to this report. Now, first I'm gonna go scroll down right here, and I've already highlighted sections that I wanna go over. And you can see by June 26, 2020, the number of OIG hotline complaints related to the economic injury loans has increased to 1,038 complaints. 1,038 complaints when they were giving almost 8.5 to 9 million loans. Now, for this information, for the amount of complaints they're receiving, I have no basis for where it's coming from or what to compare it to. But 1,038 complaints certainly doesn't seem like a lot when you're giving out 8.5 to 9 million loans, or those are the ones that were approved. And then if we scroll down, additionally, we have found implications of deficiencies with the internal controls related to disaster assistance for the COVID-19 pandemic. Our review of SBA's initial disaster assistance response has identified 250 million in economic injury disaster loans and advance grants given to potentially ineligible recipients. We have found approximately 45.6 million in potential duplicate payments. So that's why I wanted to go over the numbers from the reports so you can have some context. So while 250 million is a staggering amount of money compared to the amount of loans and advanced grants that were provided, it is not that much. And to break that down into more of a comprehensive ratio, for every $732 that was lent out or provided as the advance, $1 was subject to this fraud, allegedly. And then if we scroll down, we can see the background. And this section I highlighted because so many videos, including some of mine, have all pointed this out in total confusion as to how the SBA was running these numbers for the grants. And it says section 1110, which is the grant section and the EIDL section of the CARES Act, authorized SBA to issue a $10,000 advance within 3 days to applicants for loans being requested under the Small Business Act. It doesn't say up to, it doesn't say maybe would get it. It says to issue a $10,000 advance within how many days? 3, because that's what the CARES Act says. And then it goes on to further say the program advanced eligible businesses $1,000 per employee up to a maximum of $10,000 as an interim source of funds while applicants waited for economic injury loan decisions. Applicants did not have to be approved for a loan to receive an advance grant. Now, it would have been nice in their investigation of the SBA if they came out and said that the SBA, under its own decision-making, decided to change what the law says, but they didn't. And then further, if we look, our preliminary review and investigative findings have identified concerns with internal controls and potentially rampant fraud in the program. Rampant? I don't know if this is rampant. Now, if we scroll down a little bit further, we could see some of the reasons for the fraud, and it's stolen identities, unable to explain the origin of deposits, claiming to use the funds to open up a business. So they received the funds and then they're taking that money to open up a new business, or transferring funds into investment accounts, transferring funds to foreign accounts. Blatant fraud. This is blatant fraud into accounts with no other account activity that were established remotely just before receiving the loan funds. And if we go down even further, we could see the fraud schemes. And this one's just for social media. And this is really not shocking at all. If you've obviously looked on anything on social media, I'm probably getting phone calls and emails for fraud cases just like this. OIG's Investigations Division, in conjunction with its investigative partners, has identified several organized fraud rings that use social media to recruit applicants who split advance money with ringleaders. So this is just coaxing people into giving their personal information. They're taking that personal information and applying for these grants and these loans. And then you're stuck holding the bag, unfortunately. That is blatant fraud. Scroll down a little bit further. Then we can start to see the loan and advance grants to ineligible businesses. Now, we found SBA issued 6,132 economic injury disaster loans and 20,692 advance grants to potentially ineligible businesses. And what they found was that the SBA issued 6,132 economic injury loans and 20,692 advance grants to potentially ineligible businesses. So these businesses, what they're cross-referencing is their employee identification numbers, and they're just doing all this cross-referencing with all the data that they have, from tax returns to EINs, which is employee identification numbers. And then they're figuring out how many of these businesses were not open before January 31st, because that was one of the criteria. And they also cross-referenced or removed, and I have it highlighted here, we removed all sole proprietorships. Why? Because those are going to most likely be done with your social security number, not your EIN, because most sole proprietors don't have EINs. And then they even put a whole section for duplicate loans. And then you can see here the duplicate loans, there were 275 that have identified as getting duplicates and one receiving 4 loans. And here's the Inspector General's conclusion. The SBA should take immediate action to reduce or eliminate fraud risks by strengthening existing controls and implementing internal controls to address potential fraud. Now, I don't know how they're going to do that because the grant's over, but I suppose that they can continue with the investigations and making sure that the loans don't get issued fraudulently moving forward. And Javita Carranza did respond, and you can see that in the second half of this report. She did say that the Small Business Administration, the SBA, is proud of its role in providing economic relief to small businesses impacted by COVID-19. And then she says, because of the EIDL program's robust internal controls, the concerns raised by OIG in the draft management alert were unexpected. Okay, first, there was no way that was unexpected. Of course there's gonna be fraud when you have a program that you can apply and get the money as quickly as 3 days, even though the 3 days actually didn't occur. They did have a little bit more time, but they were completely understaffed in issuing all of this money to everybody in need. But on the flip side, it's ridiculous that they titled this report Serious Concerns of this EIDL program, because it is not a serious concern. While $250 million is a ton of money, it is a small amount relative to the amount that they actually lent out. Now, I'm not saying that they shouldn't have better checks and balances and there's not room for improvement. That's what the report really should have said. It should have said, look, this program was done as quickly as possible. They did a pretty darn good job at it, but here's where they can improve in the future or moving forward. And let's put this into perspective again. There's roughly 350 million people in the US, and they're talking about $250 million. That's roughly, if they got all the money back and distributed it to everybody, that's roughly 75 cents per individual. Now, whether or not you think that's a lot of money or not, the issue with having a report like this is how many people out there or how many small business owners out there are going and seeing these headlines and being fearful that they should even apply for the EIDL loan or having applied for the EIDL grant. And rather than keeping small business owners awake at night, wondering whether or not they're going to keep their business afloat and whether or not that they're going to get a knock on the door from the Justice Department because they took the loan, and wondering whether or not their S corporation should be worrying about distributions in their loan documents, that's ridiculous. So if you do need the EIDL loan, then apply for it and use it appropriately, and don't go out and buy Lamborghinis or expensive jewelry or a hotel stay like you've been reading from the handful of fraudsters that are out there. But it is nice to note that there are people who do agree with this. And according to the Washington Post, Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin suggests Treasury, SBA should forego verifying how small business loans were spent. So let me know in the comments down below of what you think of the SBA and how they handled the EIDL loan and the EIDL grant, and including, of course, this report. And if you've enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe and leave your comments down at the bottom.